Well, hello, welcome everyone. It looks like a lot of folks are joining, and so I'm just going to give it a few moments here as everybody uh, gets settled in. And also, I don't know if anybody else does this. I like to look around and see who else is in the room with me. So give you all a chance to do that, and then we'll get started here. Apparently, this is quite the popular topic. All right, I think we're settling in. Wow, what a great first showing. Good evening, everyone. My name is Maylin Plummer. My pronouns are she, her. I am the interim executive director for Ecological Landscape Alliance. I'm truly excited to help facilitate that. This was Nick's brilliant idea, and he really wanted to do this. And I'm so happy that we could help support him and his expertise with creating this kind of new thing we've gotten into here at ELA, these kind of community forums where you're able to join as a specific interest group or peer group to discuss, in this case, meadows. And so I want to first just thank you all for being members. And if you're not a member of ELA, I hope you'll consider it. We do a lot of really great things here, like these community forums, but also webinars, lecture series, eco tours, meetups, and conferences. So I hope you'll become a part of this really wonderful community. So not to spend too much time talking about ELA, because I could talk about that all day long. I'm really excited to introduce Nick, who is a former board member here at ELA. So it's wonderful to have him continue to be such a supporter and advocate for the work that we do. And helping the whole world kind of, get to the point where ecological landscapes is a standard. And I think we're seeing that community and that passionate community grow. So Meadow Mondays. This is a 1 hour online meetup to talk about all things meadows based on native plant communities. These types of landscaping solutions provide a myriad of environmental benefits, and they're becoming increasingly popular alternatives to, less productive or ecologically friendly lawns or grazing fields or areas that are dominated by invasive plants. So I think what's really brilliant about this community is that you can, collectively come together, grow your understanding, share experience. There's a wealth of knowledge and skill out there in designing, establishing, and managing these early successional communities. So, with that, I introduced Nick Novick. As I mentioned, he's a former board member of ELA. He's got over 25 years of land care experience, and he's majority of that has been working with meadows. So I'm really excited. Thank you again, Nick. And I also want to thank on Ecological Landscape Alliance, we have Liz Ives, who will be helping with monitoring chats, as well as Leslie Duthie, who is also a board member at Ecological Landscape Alliance. All right, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to hand it over to you, Nick. Thank you so much. Or if Liz, if you have any kind of housekeeping things that you might want to cover with chats or Q&As or anything like that before we get started?
Nick, do you mind?
Oh, no, go ahead. I had a couple to mention, but you may cover them, so go ahead.
So welcome, everyone. I know that Nick is going to ask you to use both the chat and the Q&A functions, so you may wish to find them at the bottom of your screen, as well as closed captioning. You can find some of these functions hiding under the More button if you have not used that one before. Additionally, I wanted to let you know that registration in this event has granted you access to an exclusive community forum that is available on your ELA member portal. If you go to the Workspaces tab, you will see it there under Community Forum, and you can continue the chat offline. And if anyone needs an explanation at the end, I'm happy to share my screen and show you where to find that. That's all I've got, Nick.
Yeah, I may stay for that explanation too, because I found myself in there once, but I'm not sure I could do it again. So, well, thanks, Malin. Thanks, Liz. Welcome, everybody. I wasn't quite sure how many people would be interested in this. I'm gratified to see there's a significant amount of interest. Um, while I'm blathering for a couple of minutes here, just by way of introductory remarks, maybe in the chat, if people felt inclined, if they could just share um, where they're from geographically, kind of what the preponderance of their work is, and kind of low, medium, high, just getting started a little bit or quite a bit, their experience with Meadow and sort of Meadow inspired or Meadow type plantings. I've seen the list. People are mostly from the Northeast. There's a few from further away. I don't know if they're here today. But I think it would be great for everybody here to kind of just see, where the group's from and just learn a little bit about them. Um, and then later I'll ask if we could put in the Q&A, which, as Liz said, is under that little more button at the bottom of the screen menu, kind of what maybe their, you don't have to do it right now, we could wait a little bit, but maybe what their kind of top one or two or three kind of issues, questions, challenges, concerns, something about their experience they would like to share. If we put that in Q&A and keep that separate, we can scan that. And when I'm done just sort of talking for a couple of minutes here, we can jump into a topic that, a lot of people seem to have some interest in. So I'm Nick Novick, Eco Zone 59 here in East Central Massachusetts. I've been doing land care type work. It's a term I prefer over landscaping. I think it's a little more accurate. For 20 something years, 24, 23. Scary when I think of it. I always think there's a math error in there somewhere, but apparently it's true. It's been that long. And I got into the work to do something, environmentally responsible, sustainable, whatever. So I did a bunch of things for a while, but I looked for opportunities to do sort of naturalistic, plant community-based stuff from the beginning. And I'm at the point now, all these years later, where I'm in the process of sort of giving up most other work to do the Meadow sort of work. The interest seems to be increasing the last few years. That's something I would be curious to see about, other people's experience with. It's been somewhat steady, but I don't know, with all the maybe backyard pollinator groups and that sort of interest, quite a bit more, inquiries and interest the last couple of years than the previous, 15. Just scanning my notes just so I don't miss anything here. So yeah, this is not. I think Malin mentioned this is not a sort of presenter audience kind of setup. I'm hoping that everybody will feel free to participate and ask questions and throw in their you know experience, and we can all learn from each other. It's a big enough group, a smaller group, you can usually just kind of, chime in. I think we may have to resort to the sort of raised hand function, which I think is under the React, little heart React icon at the bottom of the screen. And we'll sort of take those in order once we get to, I think Leslie is demonstrating, or maybe she has something to say. um, so if we can take those in order and kind of keep things sort of orderly. I guess we can all pretend we're back in elementary school. I'd rather not do that, but I just think that, with the size of a group, we may have to do that. And maybe mute yourself until you're ready to go on. Just, eliminate any sort of, stray background noises or whatever. Logistics, I think we've set this up to start Monday, 5 o'clock Eastern time. Every other Monday starting tonight. So sort of coincidentally, the days end up being February 9th and 23rd and March 9th and 23rd. I can go a little longer than 6. I think it's on the agenda for 6. For now, I can go to 6:15. I'm willing to go to a little bit longer after tonight. I have an online class I take that starts at 6:30, and that's tonight, but that ends like next week. So um, if people would like, I I'm reticent to do anything like through the work season, through the growing season, but if people think they would like to continue this and would have time just once a month to sort of check in this format, maybe you could indicate that somewhere. I'm open to doing that. I'd plan to do that. Um, and we can at that point, think if some day is better, some starting time is better. I'm hoping we might be able to change that. I 5 o'clock might be a little early for people doing field work. People, tend to press the the day as far as they can, and I've wrapped up sites with my headlamp on. But so I think that's all I have for me blathering about introductory comments. So
So
with that,
can I jump in here to
yeah, sure.
to give you some information? So we have people that are here from the entire Northeast corridor, from from Vermont and Maine all the way down to Washington, D.C. We have quite a few people from the Philadelphia area, and we have several Canadians with us as well. So you've got a pretty wide range of visitors here from all around the country. So.
Yeah, I'm just sort of quickly scrolling the chat. It's yeah, pretty diverse group. Well, we all seem to be roughly in the same, a little further south, roughly the same, mid latitude. So hopefully the plant community, specifics will, be applicable. I mean, the principles are applicable no matter where you go in the world, but I think a lot of us will be talking probably about the same species once we get to that level of discussion. So.
So, and I meant to mention her, Georgia Hart is from Pocatello, Idaho.
Oh wow. I guess that's the most distant participant award. So great. Well, thank you. So do we, if we had time, I'd like to have, everybody chime in and just say a few words, but that would eat up a lot of time. That's why I would, had us put it in the chat. So in Q&A, can we start to get a sense for maybe what we want to talk about tonight? If enough people kind of share the concern. I'm just looking at that now. Garden, long-term resiliency, Georgia Hart, main interest, management approaches. Takes over. So we've got I guess control of unwanted plants in your project, if I'm gonna put a title to that. I'm not quite sure what Molly's point is. Managing the transition. Oh, I see. I think the physical transition space between kind of more standard aspects of landscaping to a sort of a meadow situation. All right. So how to maybe create buffers or transition zones. Okay. Meadow without the use of herbicides. So that's preparation. Site prep is a topic. How to prep a meadow landscape in the castles, eco-regional, soil, 4 feet of clay. So lousy site conditions to start with. That's actually a good thing for natives usually. Barbara Connolly, existing meadow, we care for, but would like to add natives, unwanted plants, and add flowering natives. So that's kind of a site prep issue again. So that's kind of the theme so far. Sorry to take this sort of time, put dead air on, but I think it's
It,
worth taking a minute now just to get a consensus to go with. So just take a few more seconds here. Sorry, somebody wanted to say something?
Hi, Nick. It's Liz again.
Hi, Liz.
Someone wanted it came up in the chat. Um, please hold one. 1 moment.
I see management as the meadow develops.
My my apologies. Someone wanted a definition of a meadow versus grasslands or other similar spaces, and I thought that might be a very good place to begin. And I'm sorry if you hear background noise.
No, you're good. Um, yeah, there's sort of variations on the theme. I have my notion for what I think of as a meadow. Other people may have different notions. So establishment, seeds versus plugs. What specific design tools people use to design their meadows on a detail level, the design process, client involvement, sketches, etc. Wow, all good stuff. Well, let's sort of make this two part, because I the sort of establishment um aspect, I guess a lot of people have that, and like the piece that Liz read, um, what sort of makes a meadow. So maybe we should start with definitions, and if people have some other notion or think about this differently. But when I give talks on this, it's kind of one of the first things I do. I try to get us all on the same page and sort of, define the terms. And, I think I can say meadow and I have a vision in my head and I have sort of certain parameters I associate with that. And other people may use the term and think something somewhat different. So for me, I guess a meadow is an early, let's see, I'm trying to remember how I did this. It's an early successional community of primarily herbaceous plants that are growing in a sort of dense, multi-layered community. Um, when I took and I asked other practitioners. I took a week class with Daryl Morrison a couple of years ago, and I said, it was just on the side, we're having lunch or something. Daryl, how would you define a meadow? And he says an opening in the woods. And I'm like, hadn't heard that before, but who am I to argue with Daryl Morrison? But you could have a meadow, arguably not somewhere not in the middle of the woods. I understand the point he's making. It's that when succession in our temperate region wants to be, the endpoint of succession in our area wants to be a mature forest, the so-called climax community. I know within ecological circles, people argue about, you know, some of those terms even, but the point is that, once that canopy closes, all the plants that like a sunnier condition, um, are going to go away because they're not shade tolerant. And as soon as you create a disturbance, which could be a storm, a disease that takes out a bunch of trees, snow event that breaks branches off and creates openings, you've changed the conditions, and that community is going to change, and it's going to revert back to the sort of meadow stage, which it was earlier in the successional process. So I like my definition. When I say meadow, I'm thinking, pretty much entirely native plants. I'm thinking about herbaceous plants. There are certainly ways to incorporate shrubs within a meadow setting and sort of hint at the next, step of succession. It creates sort of management complications, but it's not impossible if you, sort the shrubs out properly. So, you can obviously have, wet meadows, the specific plants will change depending on the soil and site conditions. But, primarily, and you can have, sort of a savanna type situation where you have, 10, 15% of the area with, taller tree cover, and it will still be sort of meadow-esque under that, but those species are going to need to be more shade tolerant. So yeah, how exactly you define it, it just depends on who you're talking to and what you mean. Some people say, well, I want to create a meadow and just, throw some forb seeds, some flowering seeds into my lawn. I'm like, well, there's a number of problems with that. I guess you could call that a meadow at the end of the day, but if the ground layer is sort of dominated by, non-native cool season, turf grasses, it doesn't really fit my definition. Um, So any responses to that or questions or challenges or um,
I just think it's interesting out here in Idaho, the wet meadow I work with is, we don't have trees around it. It's sagebrush steppe. And mostly, I think the reason it persists has to do with the seasonal flooding. Even without fire, grazing, or there's no encroachment of the shrubs because of the water conditions.
hmm. Yeah, well, well, there really is no pre-human, significant involvement in the landscape. I don't know if anyone's read the book, 1491. They document and a number of people have talked about it in talks I've given where, the native, the original indigenous population, significantly managed the landscape, before European settlement. And in those cases, they intentionally kept areas open, for their use or for, specific reasons. They would burn and graze cattle and whatever. So those were sort of human um, induced limits to how succession would proceed. But now, and in even without human involvement, there are cases, and you just described a great one where some physical factor in the environment kind of limits the shrub growth. In some areas, it's soil moisture, it's the nature of the soil. Um, there are more examples of those not in the Northeast. One of these years, I've got to go visit, and I don't know if anyone's been there, but there's a remnant meadow out in Long Island, the Hempstead Plains, which is really being challenged by development surrounding it. Apparently, it's only a fraction of the area that it used to be, but it's still there and it's still hanging on. And there's like a Friends of the Hempstead Plains group trying to manage it. So there are some Eastern examples. And there's another whole discussion now people are having whether, we in our work should try to sort of duplicate or restore what we think these meadows were in the past versus just being more open to maybe species that may have never existed together previously, but still provide a high level of ecological function. And that's one of like the many sort of subjective kind of judgments that, you as a practitioner and designer are going to have to make, right? You know, percentage of grasses to the forbs, are you going to select species that were native primarily or only to the Northeast, before European settlement? Are you going to take plants from the Midwest? Are you going to take seeds or plants that were grown out in the Midwest versus things that are sourced locally? There's no right or wrong answer to any of that, and everybody's going to make their own decisions based on the nature of the project, the resources available, what your own sort of personal feelings are about all this. And like I said, there's no right or wrong, but there's a lot of sort of nuance involved with that. So, yeah, I think though typically if you're going to introduce shrubs in most areas, shrubs will introduce themselves, and that's part of meadow management is you try to eliminate those because you don't want the successional process to go toward forest. You can pick and choose which ones you may leave and allow certain isolated examples. You may decide to establish certain masses on the edge for aesthetic reasons or to simply to diversify the ecological diversity of the site. Those are all legitimate things to do. Um, so I think I'll be saying this a lot. There's kind of no specific right or wrong answer to how you decide to formulate these kinds of projects that, it just depends on a whole lot of things. And, there are principles involved. There's principle of ecological succession. And, once you learn how to work with that and understand what wants to happen, you can intervene in ways to either slow that down or speed it up or sort of dance with it. And that's one of the sort of challenges when you're talking to clients is that, client expectation, that could be a whole discussion too, but, people may have, and that's why I like to define terms, not just for like, those of us doing the work, but, between, you know, practitioner and customer or client because in their head they may think a meadow is a certain thing and they may have certain expectations. and that may not match the reality of what's involved. So, can we talk about site prep, or do people have any other sort of general questions about what we're talking about, or?
Nick, this is Kathy Connolly.
Hey, Kathy.
I think it's one of the biggest problems that we have that the word means so many different things to different people. And I'm curious how customers present themselves to other people in the group, what they describe. I assume most people are working on a customer situation, although maybe there are nonprofits that have some kind of a naturalized planting as a part of their objectives. Um, I'm just curious how people feel about this ambiguous word, and if it gives them trouble in getting to the bottom of what their customers want.
This is Barbara Connolly. I'd kind of like to chime in there. So I'm dealing with, an inherited property with one of our clients who many years ago let probably was European grasses, just stopped mowing it. And so became, and it's probably maybe a little under a quarter acre, but it's a decent size space. And we're in over the course of time trying to add, they don't have the resources to start over, so we're trying to manage what's in there, and create what would be um, a designed meadow, I'll call it. So we want to certainly introduce some natives. We want it to be aesthetically a little more interesting than what it is. It's certainly serving a lot of ecological function, even as it is. But we'd like to make sure that there are things that are providing, shelter and food for the entire year. So, but it's, we're competing with a lot of existing plants. And so for us, it's really about, creating a space that is, ecologically balanced, introducing more natives, trying to get rid of some of the invasives that are in there. And then, coming up with a plan that over time, this meadow becomes more and more ecologically balanced, I guess I'll call it.
Hmm. Yeah, I can say something about that. I know, is Erica's comment similar, or just wanted to get her comments, and then I'll
Yeah,
talk about what.
oh, can you hear me? I don't
Yeah,
think.
you're good. Yeah.
Um, so I'm fairly new. This is about my 6th year as a ecological gardener, and I primarily do most of my clients want like foundational plantings and that kind of thing with native plants. But my experience so far with meadows is I've picked up several new clients that have tried on their own, like with the meadow in a can, and then they call me like a year or two later. Yeah. And then it's just a disaster. So I'm dealing with invasives, I'm dealing with nothing that I planted, nothing that they planted from seed came in, or, there's still you're full of European grasses and weeds and all of that. And then it isn't clear to them exactly what they want when they say, well, I wanted a meadow, I just want flowers. I just want, things for pollinators. So I've had to try to educate them about the different possibilities of how, what they could have for this space. But then I'm also stuck with trying to figure out how do I uh, clean up the mess, so to speak,
Yeah.
with everything that's, there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So yeah, the common theme here is customer expectation between uh, Barbara's and Kathy's and Erica's comments. You have to. I've learned over the years you have to be, and I try to be as clear as possible at the beginning about what's involved in the management. I try to lay out management resources that are going to be needed if you want to keep it going. It certainly doesn't worth. It's not worth the money to do all the site prep properly. Put the plants in either by seed or by plug or container, if you're just not going to do what you need to do afterwards. So I try to gauge that. Um, but yeah, in terms of what people envision, if I find just showing them a lot of examples, right from the beginning, even when we're talking and they haven't even committed, I try to steer them toward, you know, I've got enough examples of my projects now, but if you don't, and sometimes I'll still pull other examples off of, the web or out of books or whatever, and sit down and meet with them and show them. It's like, well, here's a project. It's entirely grasses and sedges. There's not a flowering, there's not a forb in there. Um, it has a certain appeal. Some people may like that and it may be appropriate to the site. Um, some people maybe in the back of their head they want some like really sort of fireworks thing. It's like I think I used this example, but I was talking to somebody before. Like it's like your holiday decorations. You drive down the street, in December, and some people have the wind blown things moving around. They have sleighs with Santa in there. They have every colored light on every tree and on every surface. And there's other people they have white lights and just a few, and maybe one colored thing somewhere. So people are going to have those different sorts of aesthetic kind of inclinations. If you can, if you can't set up a meeting in their house, like try to like discreetly peer in their window and kind of see how they've done their layout of the house and how they've designed the house. Some people it looks like a showroom. Other people, it's more lived in. There's, stuff strewn around. So, none of this is dispositive. It's just all going to sort of, feed your um, how you think about like the sort of physical and sort of aesthetic aspects and which species you're going to pick. Some people are thinking, the meadow is going to be in bloom like from April till the frost kills it, and it's going to look the same every year. So you got to say at that point, well, here's what happens with meadows. They're dynamic. They change every year. It's never going to look exactly the same year to year. Um, you know, Plants in full sun. There are very few that are going to bloom earlier than April, May, maybe. You can try to introduce ephemerals that adds another whole layer of cost and sort of management issues. But so yeah, I just try to be like clear and go back to it. Sometimes people will you think they got it and then they'll say something is no, they don't got it yet, and you have to kind of go circle around and go back. If you're starting, like with Barbara's situation, where you're trying to augment a situation, like you're just adding stuff to a lawn, or there's already something there and it's kind of a hodgepodge, and you're going to just try to add a few things. I found that never really works, and I won't do it. I tried to do it once, and I'm like, nope. Deborah, you're next as soon as I'm done babbling. Um, uh, my rule of thumb, if I'm trying to start, and not everybody may want like a full, highly diverse species, do all the work, do all the prep, whole 9 yards to do it right. I get that there are some situations where that just might not be possible. And so, yeah, your inclination is to like, yeah, how can we manage what's here and improve it a little bit? And you probably can, but depending on your starting point of plants you don't want, cool season grass, unwanted cool season, like especially rhizomatous grasses, like, bluegrass in a meadow. It's one of the worst weeds you can have, really. People think in terms of, oh, knotweed and all these other things, but no, crabgrass, even when you're getting started from seed, if you have mats of crabgrass, it's hard for plants to get started. So, my rule of thumb, if I'm starting from seed and this happened. I went and I looked. They had done this somebody did in Meadow. They had the condo association had no record of it. They didn't know when it was put in. They didn't have a species list. There was nothing. And they called me in to look at it and say, this doesn't really look great to us. What can we do? And I looked at it, and there was, I don't know, there was bindweed. There was what's this? It's almost like Velcro. It's kind of a spiny weed. I can't think of the name. There were like woody invasive things, a whole bunch of stuff. And my rule of thumb in that case is if it's more than 50%, and even 50% is a lot, more than 50% stuff you don't want, you nuke it and you start over. And I know that I saw a question about, can you prep without herbicide? Yes, you can, but it's more involved, more expensive, less effective. We can talk about that later if we want. But so that's kind of my rule of thumb. If you're starting from a lawn is actually kind of the best starting point because, any weeds that are surviving there are the ones that survive under the mower deck. The mowing has reduced the seed bank of a lot of the real problematic weeds. So there, that's a fairly easy starting point. If you're starting from like an old field situation or, you're clearing like the edge of the woods and then, that's going to induce a whole bunch of seed germination in the seed bank, then, you've got to do more extensive, site prep before, especially, well, plants or seed. I was going to say, especially if you're starting from seed, but really doesn't matter. You can't just clear the site and then go in and plant it or seed it like, the next month. For lawns, I do one full growing season. And this is one of the hardest selling points. People don't want to hear this and they don't want to do it. So if you have a lawn, I say, well, okay, we're going to kill off the lawn and then we're going to keep killing off anything that grows for a full growing season. And then we'll either dormant seed in the fall or we'll seed it next spring. Or if it's small enough, we plant it. If you have an old field, and we just put down seed this year that we prep for 2 years, people are looking at dirt for 2 years. But and there's ways not to do that. You can do cover crops to suppress the weeds. That works, but it's more management, more expense, more seed, more more mowing, more work. There's alternatives to just herbiciding it. But if price is a concern, then you're adding layers of price to it. So I'm sorry, somebody had their hand up before I referred to. Deborah, was it?
Yeah, this was going back to we were talking about client expectations and helping, your clients sort of understand what this is going to look like and what they want. And I just had a quick thought that I wanted to share. I've had some good luck using questionnaires. So kind of creating a bunch of questions for clients to get at what they want. And that's just sort of a way to get on the same page. So I think it's like a 2-page questionnaire I made where it kind of asks everything I can think of up front. Anything from, aesthetics, like, well, what colors do you like? Do you like a wild look or a more subdued, kind of organized look, to practical things, like, what are you going to be using the space for, near the meadow, access, circulation, that kind of thing. Who's going to take care of the meadow. So that has been a good tool to just kind of quickly get on the same page, as long as the client is willing to take the time to fill it out, of course.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, because sometimes you don't know. Because I'll sit down and we're looking at pictures. I'm thinking, I could do the questionnaire and put like 4 different pictures and say, oh, which one of these do you prefer and why?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a great idea. But I'll sit down with people and they're like, oh, gee, there's a lot of yellow there. Can we do something without so much yellow? Or, some people say, I just hate that sort of pink color. And then I've had other customers, I try to, elicit something like this about what they want. And they're like, no, I don't care, whatever. So it's going to run the gamut. But you kind of want to know going in, like what those parameters may or may not be. So,
Yeah, same.
and then we did one project, and I always like to have, on smaller projects, it's hard to steal the space sometimes for a path, but I almost always advocate for a path and maybe a sitting area to just kind of pause because it's sort of one thing to be outside of the thing looking at it as sort of from the perimeter versus kind of feeling like you're in it. And I think it creates a whole sort of other level of experience for people if you can kind of feel like you're in it. So, um, but yeah, a questionnaire, great idea. So, was that useful for the people who brought those things up? Any follow up on that? No. Are we done with that for now then? Yes, we are. Um, so that's I guess that's so for now that's a little bit about sort of client expectations. Yeah, it's funny because yeah, a lot of times people like I think I just mentioned they kind of don't know what they want. Um, and you can show them some examples, and I try to sometimes elicit some more detail, and they either really genuinely don't care so much, they just want something colorful, or they don't know enough about what's possible. So I try to present them with like a lot of visual like examples and try to pick out like, which ones they sort of seem to gravitate toward and, base the design somewhat on that. So I guess, site prep, should we jump into that? We've kind of circled around it a little bit. I mean, someone had, and this can be controversial, but the whole herbicide chemical question. But um, again, it depends on a lot. It depends on the nature of the site. It depends on the size of the site. Um, some of the sort of chemical alternative methods are easier on smaller sites. We've done like an acre and a half, and a lot of those sort of alternative things, whether it's, smothering in some way or another, or, repeated soil disturbance, become logistically and economically challenging the bigger the site gets. I continue to argue, and, I've had customers that say, I won't use those poisons on my property when you start talking about herbicide, but um, it's still in my mind and to my thinking, it's still easiest, cheapest, least problematic, you know, environmental problematic even way to do it. If you're responsibly using the herbicide, it's kind of for a one-off with a couple of follow-ups, and then you don't probably have to use it again. And maybe we can translate into transition into sort of the management. There's a couple of management questions, and that applies to once the meadow is established too. It's usually once you get your meadow going and the plants you want are sort of starting to dominate and they're reaching mature size, the opportunity for unwanted plants to find their way into that and get a start and get going is pretty limited. And to manage those plants at the early stage of that process, before your meadow is mature, don't necessarily have to use herbicide. I always thought of herbicide as mostly a site prep tool. Um, so it's, I keep saying, especially if you're seeding, but you got to do it the same way for plants. I don't know why I do that in my head, but I like to start with a clean slate, um, where you've killed off anything that was growing there and you've allowed the weed seeds in the soil bank to germinate and you've killed those off for, like I said, at least a growing season. Um, in cases, and herbicide does that pretty well. Um, a lot of the bad, again, this is me. People can argue with this, and I welcome the challenge, but um, glyphosate works really well on grasses. Sometimes you don't even have to do a follow-up. It works less well on woody things. But if you're primarily using glyphosate, people say, "Oh my God, glyphosate! I've heard that's really awful, and there's cancer." And it's, well, yeah. I think I did the math, and I think it's almost two orders of magnitude more glyphosate is used on in agricultural settings, and most of those settings are um, industrial scale Roundup ready crops where the crops have been developed genetically altered to be resistant to the glyphosate, and they use the herbicide on large acreages, often by airplane, multiple times a year to kill anything that isn't the target crop, the crop you're trying to grow. And they even use it to draw to desiccate grains like just before harvest because if the grain is any moisture in the grain, by the time it gets into storage, it can get moldy and you lose it. So it turns out that glyphosate's a really good desiccant. It draws the moisture out. And I'm going to say that if people are getting like glyphosate in their bodies, and glyphosate is anything coming in streams, it's not coming from people like me spraying like a meadow area in somebody's backyard, and I wear the gloves and I'm very careful I don't get it on me. Usually it's the applicant that's most vulnerable. I'm going to argue that there's pretty much zero risk to me, your pets, the environment. You keep the pets off. You don't go there when it's wet. It rains or you run the irrigation, the residue washes into the soil. The half-life in the soil is a matter of weeks or months, and then it mostly breaks down. I know there's some byproduct that lasts longer, and some people say it's problematic, but it essentially breaks down into elemental compounds within that period of time. It adsorbs, ADSORB, it adsorbs to fine soil particles to the clay particles and to organic matter in the soil. It doesn't wash through the groundwater. And you're going to do it for that prep, and then you're not going to ever use it again. So the way I think about it is that I'll take that trade-off. Very little risk, apparently, from what I can tell. Again, if people have other information, uh, happy to look at it. I would like to be proven wrong in a way. Um, and then it's sort of gone, and then you don't use it. And so you look at the alternatives and say, well, could you cover it with plastic? Yeah, you could. What's plastic made out of? Natural gas, fossil fuels. You're going to roll out rolls and rolls. You're going to have to pin it down because the wind's going to want to tear it up and blow it away. Happened on a small project we did. You're going to maybe try to reuse it a couple of times, but it gets torn. It starts to break down. It's going to end up in a landfill. It doesn't sound great to me. You can try to cover it with like paper and chips, wood chips or something, mulch. Well, it's probably not going to add a significant amount of organic matter, but somebody mentioned like lousy sites in the chat. Often, like the poorer soils and the thinner soils, there's plants that'll grow anywhere. I mean, there's plants that grow in beach sand, there's plants that grow in alpine zones and soil that's like, half an inch thick. The wind chill temperatures are, 120 below zero in the winter. There's a plant for every situation, and there's a community plants for every situation. So, it turns out that, you don't want to fertilize or amend your site. People say, oh, I got lousy soil. It looks all sandy. I say, that's great. You'll have a great meadow. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to spend any money. No fertilizer, no organic matter, no compost. Um, so, you're going to maybe try to control like your site and prep by, rolling out some paper. People use cardboard. We are picking, there's a small little meadow we just did. Every time we go, I'm picking out little pieces of the plastic tape that are used around like cardboard boxes that they broke down and put down, and then they put mulch over it. And as the mulch breaks down, all this plastic on the site. So you can do that. I mean, yeah, you can take the tape off ahead of time. You can put down paper. You can buy craft paper. There's rolls of it made in agriculture, and then you can put wood chips. Yeah, that will kill the existing plants. But then if you want to seed needs like contact with mineral soil. Seed doesn't really germinate very well just thrown into wood chips, compost, let alone wood chips. So we could talk more about that. People can, challenge that, but
Nick, can I interrupt you?
Sure. Yeah, I see Molly has her hand up.
Yeah, sorry. I can't stay, and I just wanted to ask, you've been talking about all these preps, but you haven't mentioned just excavating like I would with a regular garden. Why can't I just excavate it and replace the soil with clean soil and then do everything, and then my client doesn't have to wait?
Certainly an option. I took the workshop last year with Noel Kingsbury and Nigel Dunnett. They do a Zoom class that goes from, I don't know, September, end of September to March, every 10 days. And Nigel was doing, he teaches at, Nigel Dunnett designed the grounds around, it was 2012 when the Summer Olympics were in London. He designed a lot of those grounds there, and he designs these projects in middle of cities, like all these little hell islands and little triangles between roads, little hell strips, and that's exactly what they do. They take out all of whatever's there. They bring in a designed, engineered like soil, I guess, growing medium, and you don't need a lot of depth of it, but you know, good work if you can get it. I mean, if that's in the budget, sure. But a lot of times, especially on bigger sites, you kind of have to work with what is there, and modify it accordingly. And sometimes you have to take what you're given. But yeah, I mean, no reason you couldn't if it's in the budget. But have you had a site where you've done that?
Yeah, Nick, that's like pretty much all we do, because my clients don't want to wait.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if we're installing gardens that way, to me, I don't, I, I would love to be able to convince my client to wait, uh, 2 years, but it's just never going to happen.
Yeah.
And I haven't, I could tell them like, hey, you could wait 2 years and it's going to save you 20 grand, or you can pay it right now and it's done this season. More often than not, the people that are, reaching out are just going to go for it.
I've had the same experience, Molly, too.
Yeah, people don't want to wait.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, like I said, if they can afford to do that, sure.
Yeah, there's no drawback, right, to just bringing in soil and doing it, your seeds, your plugs,
I
whatever.
wouldn't think, but I mean, there's soil and then there's soil. I mean, what are you
Sure.
bringing in, right?
Yeah.
So, you would need to have something, you know, specced properly, not too fertile, and you need some organic matter. Where are they getting that? How is that produced? If that's compost, you have to really look at the details of how whoever's making that, producing that, is doing the process. Because I see people all the time, they want to sort of, make their soil better. And, you know, there's no reason to add soil. I mean, here you're replacing it, but a lot of times people, even like a regular garden situation, they want them in their soil and say, oh, let's get some like topsoil or, screen loam. And it's like, you kind of have no idea what's in there, what the fertility level is or anything. So, if you can spec something and you have like somebody that can, produce that and give you some guarantee that it's weed free, then and you can trust them, then yeah, why not? But
Yeah.
I,
Okay,
I think
great.
for most
Terrific.
of the projects I'm on, it's just, the scale of it, who knows? Like you're gonna replace like two acre feet of soil.
Yeah, I'm not doing meadows that big. It's, small backyard septic system type stuff. They're not, unfortunate. I would love to do a football field, but I haven't gotten that big yet.
Yeah, well, on that scale, like I said, sure, if they can afford it, go
Yeah.
for it. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick.
But I would just look, really look to see what the ingredients are and be sure if there's a compost component that, they're managing the process properly to kill any weed seeds and pathogens. So yeah, Deb, do you have?
Uh, I was just gonna, yeah, say, I guess to that, done a couple where, we've regraded, a whole front yard, and sometimes you don't even really need to add any soil just by having moved soil from one area to another. You're able to get away with not adding anything, which is really nice. So that can happen. And I mean, I think that if a client really wants to do it, that cardboard can work. I mean, I have done it on a couple properties. and used landscape pins to pin it down, and so didn't add any, you just put leaves on top, and didn't add any wood chips or much more than that. And so far so good. We're in year 2, so that has worked for me. It just feels wrong to put the herbicide down, and people don't want to do it too on crews, so I'm always reluctant. I'm reluctant to do that.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be a personal subjective decision. Like I said, alternatives can work. And if people, at scale, if people want to spend the extra money, that's fine.
Yeah,
I'm just
scale
saying
is
what.
really, really important. I can't get away with some of that on the large scale.
Yeah. I think Kathleen, it's giving me the hands up in order that people raised them. So I think Kathy Connolly was next, and then Keegan.
Yeah, the one problem that I have found with scraping soil away is that really doesn't remove the embedded seed bank. And for instance, I had one project, and it wasn't a huge area, a couple hundred square feet. We scraped away about the top 2.5 inches of soil, and did not bring in any purchased media. Just we're going to plant into the next layer. Things looked great for a year, and in the second year, it was everything that was put in was surrounded by Trifolium repens, the little low-growing clover, and some other unwanted plants. And so we hadn't defeated the embedded seed bank in any way. So I just offer it as one experience with that approach. I just have a question about, how, and bringing in a medium. Again, I've done that and had terrible weed problems with purchased topsoil and other combinations. And so once again, I so far haven't gotten confidence in that approach just in my own practice. So that's all.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Keegan?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I have a job site. It's a specific circumstance that hopefully leads to a broader conversation. 4-acre site, so a bit larger than some of the properties that were just being discussed, for soil removal as the site prep. I've done projects where there's a big reset, herbicide and seeding, or repeated cultivation then seeding. This particular project I'm working on is there's essentially no budget to do other than continue mowing. They've just been haying this 4-acre mountain field. And there's on the margins opportunity to do some natural recruitment. There's some little blue stem, native forbs, other things that I want to bring into this mostly smooth brome field. And so just wondering if you had any words of wisdom or thoughts on kind of a mowing only regime. And there might be an opportunity to go out and do some hand broadcasting of cover crop into that. But is it fool's errand in your experience? Have you had any luck with a mowing only approach to do kind of some natural recruitment, just get on schedule?
So you're talking about mowing an existing situation that's primarily non-native cool season grass?
Correct. Yep. So it's, you can imagine we've all been on these sites where close to the home, somebody was broadcasting seed, and further out into this kind of hay field, it goes from being fescues to smooth brome primarily, and then back to natives. So trying to reverse that and bring the natives back closer to the house, but just by mowing.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the ratio of the plants, the species that you don't want versus the ones you want. I mean, there was that early management question. One of the things you can exploit, especially the first season after you're trying to, establish a project from scratch, is time mowing is very valuable, right? So if says let's say you are starting from seed, the site is essentially blank except for, say year after you've seeded, whether you've seeded in, the spring or the fall is dormant seeding, those plants won't show until some number of months. Well, dormant seeding won't show until April, May of the following year. And then if you seed in the spring, you'll start to see those the same year. In the meantime, natives are notoriously slow growing. So one of your best, easiest management tools, those first, the earliest months of the meadow's life is to just mow the whole thing, right? And the weeds, the ruderal weeds, are going to grow much faster than any of your design species, right? And so you don't need to kill the weeds, you don't need to pull them out, you just need to keep them from going to seed. And until your, design plants, the natives kind of get higher up, put on some height, put on some width, and they start to dominate the space, and then the weeds have trouble competing. And you can adjust your mowing height throughout the season as your natives, get a little taller, if not like if your mower deck doesn't go so high, depending on the scale, like string trimmer is a great tool. You just cut off the heads of the weeds, at increasingly taller height. And so if that, I'm trying to think if that could work in your situation where, early in the season, cool season grasses have a jump on the warm season grasses. You can exploit the difference between the cool season grasses you don't want and the warm season grasses you do want. The cool season grasses may be, where are you geographically?
This project's in the Catskills, but yeah,
Okay, yeah. So it's
that's
similar to where I am here.
yeah,
Um, so, cool season grasses are going to get going as soon as the soil starts to unfreeze and the snow is gone, right?
yeah,
And so they'll be going maybe late March, April, May,
yeah,
June, and then meantime, little blue stem's not doing anything.
right,
You'll look down maybe the middle, late May, early June. You're starting to see
yeah,
some green because it's a warm season grass, right? It needs like what 63, 4, 2, 3, 4 degrees soil temperatures. So if you can compromise by just kind of almost scalping, let it grow, scalp it, let it grow, scalp it. It's not going to get rid of it, but it's going to compromise it enough. And if you
right,
wanted to use herbicide, it's a good time to use herbicide. And if there's like other plants you don't want to hurt, there's grass specific herbicide. And if you use that, you would hurt the brome and not the little blue stem because it's not even showing green yet. But even mechanically, just by mowing, I would think if you did that kind of obsessively for a couple of years, it may not get rid of it, but you start to tip the balance. I've had stands of little blue stem where I've actually it came in like a little too much where I wanted to share the space. I mean, people say, oh, little blue stem, it's clumping, is that too competitive? But man, when it's happy and it gets a jump, it's a pretty solid stand of it. So I think it might be competitive in that situation. It would be worth trying for a year or two.
thanks. Yeah, that's the plan, and I think I'm now deciding whether or not to throw in a cover crop on top of that and do those early season mowings and then
Mm.
broadcast cover crop to try and smother also, but
How
we'll
how big
see
is
how
the
it goes.
site? How big is the site?
4 acres.
Oh, four. That's right, 4 acres. Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
just big enough to
yeah,
be a nuisance. So
yeah. I'd be
well,
curious to know how that works out.
no, thanks. That's pretty much you described the approach and the tack that we're going to take. So I'll let you know how it goes in two
I
years.
I think that makes sense. Yeah, yeah. Hopefully, we'll still be meeting in a few years. So.
Thank you.
Um, we're at 6:07. Like I said, I can go to 6:15 and then I got to turn it into a pumpkin. So, any more
So
thoughts on site prep?
why don't you take one more question, Nick, and then we'll let Liz show us all where to find
Oh, yeah.
the
That'd be,
dialogue, and I want you all to know that I've copied all of the questions in the Q&A, and I will post them to that chat. But go ahead.
that's great. Thank you, Leslie.
Yeah. Erica's got her hand up.
No, I can't see that, but
Yeah, hi.
sure, go ahead. Yeah.
So I had heard too, I don't know if anybody, you, Nick, or anybody has tried this, applying sulfur or doing something to lower the acidity, to help with weeds or some of the cool season grasses, trying to make it less hospitable to them than that in conjunction with the mowing, where like little blue stem and some of the natives can handle a little lower acidity. Have you heard of anything like that, or has anyone tried anything like that?
My understanding with sulfur is that it increases the acidity. Sulfur is acidic, so it lowers the pH, which means it's increasing the acidity. Um, in soils, if you're trying to use native species that kind of prefer a leaner, less fertile soil, um, and you're given a situation where the soil is maybe too rich, certain plants like little blue stem is a great example. I've seen it like a foot tall in like gravel pits and sand and like roadsides where, the sand they put on the road for, winter traction, kind of finds its way off to the side. And you get out, sometimes you just pull off the side of the road for something to whatever, and you'll look at what's there. And it's like you've been at the beach, right? Little blue stem, like, purple lovegrass, Erogostis spectabilis loves that, and very few other plants will even grow in it. So you'll see these swaths of, Erogostis spectabilis growing in the sand, right? But sometimes, and so the little blue stem's like a foot tall. And then you get sites where you think, oh, perfect site for meadow. You test the soil, and it's like, the nutrients are high, there's a lot of organic matter. And you try to put in some of these species there, and the little blue stem gets like 2.5 feet tall, 3 feet tall. It's, pumped with nitrogen, it falls over, it kind of flops, and it looks nothing like the plant, when it grows in the gravel pit. So the way I've always thought to use it, and there may be some other nuance to this that I'm not familiar with or thinking of, but the sulfur, and it takes a long time to act. If it's just elemental sulfur, one of the few reasons to ever till a site would be to incorporate it, because I've seen it sit on the top of the soil for like a year before it breaks down. Then who knows how long it takes to get down into the soil profile. But the sulfur, the reason to use the sulfur is that, and if you remember these diagrams from like, botany or plant science where, pH is in the middle of 7, and then the plant absorption of nutrients is kind of like this, and then it kind of tapers, like when the soil gets real alkaline or real acid. So the intent of the sulfur, my understanding, is that it drops the soil pH to the point where your floppy little blue stem is not going to absorb so many nutrients. It's not going to grow so tall. Whether that can affect the weed to good plant ratio situation, I don't know. So generally, weeds do better. What we think of as weeds in these situations do better in soils that are richer. One of the best meadows I ever did, this has only happened twice with the soil probe. You have the soil probe, the T handle, and like half the tube is open, and you push it down, and you take a little bit of soil out, and you put it in a container, and you do that like 6 or 8 times, and you send that off for your sample. So I was sampling the soil. It was like Fairhaven, Massachusetts, on the south coast on the bay, and I pushed the soil probe down. Now it's like that 18-inch probe or something. The handle bottomed out on the soil surface. Usually you're like clink, clink, clink. You can't, there's so many rocks you can't get it in. It was almost like beach sand. And I thought, this meadow is going to be great. And it was. It was one of the best ones we did. Then the customer moved, they sold the property, and they put it back to lawn. But I have pictures to show. So, so yeah, that's my take on sulfur. Somebody may have something else to say about it, but
Well, thank you very much, Nick. And I'm just going to ask, I'm going to invite Liz to give a little demonstration of the Member 365 portal. both members and non-members, most of you are members, but can access this. And if you are signing up for this class, you will be able to access the discussion.
Hello again. All right, I'm going to share my screen. So please ignore the top band that says CRM. This workspace is your ELA portal. Under your name up at the top, you have a number of administrative things that you can do. Same thing under my account. And this is also where you can find CEU certificates and things like that. But under workspaces, this is what we need today. You'll see that there is a community forum for Meadow Mondays. And because you have enrolled in this particular series, you have access to this. We're not only going to add the questions to the workspace discussion, you'll all be able to start discussions there. We can also upload the video of this particular session, and we'll add more of them as we go along to Meadow Monday. They will only be available through this community forum and not necessarily through the video library, which is the broader ELA video collection. All right, so that is all I have. Any questions about using the ELA member portal while I have you? Feel free to just unmute and ask. I'll take that as a not now. And so I think we're good.
So did Leslie, did you say you were going to post the chat and Q&A contents in there somewhere too?
Yes, I took the Q&A contents. I took the questions that you didn't specifically address. I have quite a few. I took only initials. I did not take your full name. So I put initials with each question so you all can discuss among yourself, and Nick can pick maybe a couple of topics for his for our next meeting. And maybe expand upon some of your thoughts. So thank you all so much for attending today. And thank you, Nick, for all of your amazing expertise on the topic of meadows. And
I cringe when I hear the word expert or expertise. I know some
sorry.
stuff. I have some experience and I think I know some things, but I'm always questioning what I think I know. And that's the thing with this kind of work. It's like every single project I learn something new. So I try to approach this with kind of like, the Zen beginner's mind and, not draw any like hard lines around what I think I know.
So thank you, Nick. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for
Thank
coming.
you. Thanks.
See you in the discussion room.